Okay, great. So welcome along, ladies and gentlemen, to the final hour of SETICon. I hope you've had a great time with us. And one person who we've had a great time with so far here at SETICon is Bob Richards. And I'm Adrian Brown, by the way. And Bob is our interviewee today. He's a space entrepreneur and futurist who at one time was a special assistant to Carl Sagan. He's also an evangelist of the new space movement and has been a catalyst for many commercial space ventures. And he's currently the CEO of Moon Express, which we'll be getting to during this interview, I'm sure. Bob, could you tell us a little bit about your upbringing and when you first felt the interest in space exploration?
I think I have a photograph of that very moment. You know, the point of inflection where you knew. And it was about 5 years old. I was walking through the rocket garden with my family at Kennedy Space Center. And that's my earliest actual memory, that impact. And so I think that set the stage for a few years later, I think, or very close thereafter, 3 things were happening that I think had the impact on me, that imprinted me forever. Apollo was happening on the television. Star Trek was happening on the television. And 2001 was happening in the theater. And so in my mind, there was a complete linearity between those 3 things. And so it wasn't until graduating from, or in the middle of college and university, where I realized I was an orphan of Apollo, not a child of Apollo. And all this stuff just wasn't going to happen. And I was lucky enough to link up with 2 other like-minded people, Peter Diamandis, who now has become famous and infamous through the X Prize and other activities that we've been collaborating and conspirating, if that's a word, being conspirational on for some time, and Todd Hawley. 3 of us, undergraduate students, coming from different countries, different universities, different disciplines, found this common love and passion of space, and were able to collaborate in ways that created student organizations, the earliest being the Students for the Exploration and Development of Space, which we co-founded in the early 80s. Which led...
Physically, where were you guys?
I was in Toronto. So for the earliest years of creation of SEDS, Todd was at the George Washington University in Washington, D.C., and Peter was at MIT in Cambridge. So we didn't meet for the first year. We just had telephone calls and letters. This is no Facebook, no Twitter, right? No email.
So how did you even become aware of
it was
each other's
really hard
existence?
to meet. Well, it was really hard to meet people who you wanted to change the world with back then. It was luck. There was a certain magazine that some of you may remember that many of us space cadets raced out to the stands every month to buy, called Omni magazine. And that's kind of how you found out the coolest things that were going on. And there was letters to the editor section, which always had a colorful cast of characters with ideas. And one of the headlines of the letters caught my attention. It said, "Students Unite, Students for the Exploration and Development of Space Unite." It was written by this one Peter Diamandis, who was kind of a call to arms against what he saw was the sunset on American vision in space. And I read that letter. I said, here's a kid down there in the U.S. who really thinks the same way I am. So I wrote to Peter because there's an address to write to. Put the paper in the paper, and the paper on the paper, and put that in a box, and it went away somewhere. And eventually something came back, and we got on the phone. We shared phone numbers, and I think that was the first and the last time I ever told Peter he wasn't thinking big enough. And that this should be an international. I mean, I'm in Canada. Let's make it an international adventure to get students from all over the world. How could student collaboration in space impact our future? So that's how SEDS was born. And we didn't physically meet until the first founding conference, just over a little year later.
And the abbreviation was
SEDS, S-E-D-S.
And it stood for?
Students for the Exploration and Development of Space, because that's what we were.
And so how did that lead you further into your space career?
So what we didn't realize when we created SEDS is that we had actually set our expiry dates. You know, it was planned obsolescence because we could only be leaders of a SEDS group for so long, and it wasn't until we were graduating university we said, oops, what do we do now? As we had to hand over the reins. So we thought long and hard about what type of affiliation or organization we could form that had a relevance to our stage of development and had a larger kind of brand than SEDS. And the idea of, you know, what's the fundamental common denominator that was uniting us and that would unite all other people like us that we wanted to meet. So we went for the biggest one, which we called the space generation, which was all those born since October 1st, 1958. You were by definition a member of the space generation, so resistance was futile. And we created a foundation in that, with that theme and identified a number of projects we wanted to undertake. One of the 8 projects was something called the International Space University. And after about a year or so of test marketing the various ideas, it was clear that ISU was the strongest idea and in many ways embraced many of the others. So we had announced in 1986 in Innsbruck, Austria, our intent to call a founding conference to gather delegations from around the world to talk about the idea of founding such a university that would address space in an international and intercultural and interdisciplinary way. That led to the founding conference, now famous, of the ISU on April 12th, 1987. With a resounding yes, we had representatives from China and the Soviet Union and the United States, from Canada and Europe, and a combination of youthful exuberance and passion with experienced establishment type people. And people said, this is a good, this is worth a try, people said. So it was at the conclusion of that founding conference that we were given the sanction and some money by each of the agencies to see if we could pull off the first summer session program of ISU, which we did in 1988. We gathered 104 students from, I think it was like 31 or 32 countries. And the International Space University is now celebrating its 25th year. And that, what was originally called the Summer Session Program, the SSP, remained that name until early 2000s when we were down in Australia and they said, you know, this isn't our summer.
Yeah, it's got to be international and Southern Hemisphere as well.
Yeah, so in order not to alienate the other half of the planet, we kept the acronym but changed it to the Space Studies Program, which this summer, this Northern Hemisphere summer, is hosted down at the Florida Institute of Technology and the Kennedy Space Center.
Now, we've got 3 pictures of Mars here between us, and I know that you've been closely involved in looking for these white things that are floating around on the surface, not on the surface, in the atmosphere of Mars. Could you tell us about your involvement in the Phoenix lander and how that all came?
Right, that was really a very exciting time. I had been the founding director of the space division of a Canadian company called Optech, which specializes in LiDAR, so laser radar, using incoherent processes, but lasers in order to, has an application to meteorological type of science. So we were able to propose and win a place on the Phoenix lander mission. So the company designed and built, it was a private sector instrument. However, the Canadian Space Agency was the one who funded this and made the gift to NASA, so Canada was able to participate for the very first time in a planetary mission. And so the program began in about 2004, and in 2007 we launched, and we landed right about here, near the North Pole of Mars. And for those wonderful 90 sols, 3 Earth-type months, we had a laser light show on Mars. We fired lasers up into the Martian atmosphere, studied atmospheric particulates and the way that the clouds interact, the hydration cycles, the way that the boundary condition between space and the Martian atmosphere changes from night to day. It's very, very dramatic, actually. And at the end of the mission, after 90 days, as the sun was setting and the power of the spacecraft was reducing to zero, we were able to detect for the very first time, falling snow on Mars. So the Canadians discovered the falling snow on Mars, which was so appropriate.
Very appropriate.
So yeah, that was fun. Yeah.
And so how did, and now your current, a lot of your time is invested now into Moon Express as the CEO. And
Yes.
You've had an interesting transition through another company as well. Can you tell us how that actually worked and
Sure.
what the current state of affairs is with Moon Express?
Absolutely.
Bring us up to date on that.
Absolutely. So it was post Mars. You know, I was in the post Mars blues. That's a pretty hard act to follow. It was fantastic. It was a career highlight. Being an assistant to Carl Sagan and a student, I had been infected with a passion for Mars for a long, long time. So this was a real closure for me. But I'm also an entrepreneur, and I really am a commercial person at heart. And Phoenix was, even though it was built by the private sector, it was a government mission. All of the requirements, all of the risks flowed down from NASA and JPL to the Canadian Space Agency to we in the private sector. And so it was a government type of cost plus contract, and it was a wonderful thing, but I thought it was an enormously expensive activity that wasn't necessarily the way it could have happened. So in trying to come up with what would be a commercial way to approach space exploration, NASA was already experimenting with something called the Commercial Orbital Transportation System, COTS, where private sector companies could get into the business of transportation and delivery of cargo and maybe eventually humans to the International Space Station. So I thought, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could have an extension of that to exploration? Because I'm a planetary person. I really want this to lead to humanity as a multi-planet species. So I started thinking about, well, our closest planetary neighbor. How about let's just make it easy. Let's go for the first one, the moon. And I started to really understand that the moon was not just a figment of my imagination as an early kid. It was a real destination. And we were learning, beginning in late 90s and then with subsequent probes throughout the early 2000s, that the moon was a much more interesting place than we even thought. And we're discovering that the moon was wet, it had water, and it had volatiles, and it has precious metals, and all of these surprising things about the moon. So maybe there's a commercial opportunity here. So it was about a year before the Google Lunar X Prize was announced, and this was a time when the Ansari X Prize had been won. So the $10 million prize that was put forward by the X Prize Foundation for the first private team to reach space with a private spacecraft, funded by Paul Allen and built by Burt Rutan, Scale Composites. Spaceship One had won the Ansari X Prize in 2004 with those two fabulous flights. And it was in that post-Ansari X Prize era where the X Prize Foundation was imagining, well, what's next? What's the next space prize? The moon seemed to became the ultimate contender. Many of us in the industry were involved in, well, what would such a moon prize look like, and how much should it be, and who should sponsor it? So the evolution of the Lunar X Prize over the course of a year or two was commensurate with me standing up a commercial company, which eventually was named Odyssey Moon. And in thinking about commercial architecture for an exploration company, when the Google Lunar X Prize was ultimately announced in 2007 in September, when Larry and Sergey had agreed to put up the $30 million first prize purse, Odyssey Moon was able to react very quickly and become the first registrant for the Google Lunar X Prize, something we were very, very proud of. Mm-hmm. So in the interest of being from Canada and not in the United States, there's an interesting aspect of doing business in the United States in the space sector that has to do with export controls. Very limiting in certain respects, not just from the United States if you're trying to do business with internationals, but if you're outside the United States trying to do business with U.S. companies is very difficult in space because of these very rigid export controls. So Odyssey Moon had been formed as an offshore company, not even Canada, but actually in the Isle of Man. And a lot of this was to try to create a company that would have lots of flexibility in the way that it architected its technologies internationally. So not a bad idea. But it was in 2010 when NASA had agreed to match the Google and Rex Prize with another $30 million, which it would award in a COTS-like way for successful milestones. The catch was you had to be a U.S. company. So I found myself kind of snookered, and it was in that interim, NASA Ames had hosted the 2009 Space Studies program of the International Space University. I had co-founded another university called Singularity University with Peter, Dan Mendes, and Ray Kurzweil, and others. And in that same year, 2009, spent much of my time here in the Valley and never really left. I discovered a culture here and kind of my tribe, people who understood commercial space. And it was in that context I met Naveen Jain and Barney Pell, two of my co-trustees on the Singularity University board, who became enamored with the idea of a commercial lunar play that I had been advocating. So in a quick transition that you alluded to, we stood up Moon Express as a U.S. company, vying to win one of those coveted NASA contracts that was called the Innovative Lunar Demonstrations Data Program, each of which could be worth up to $10 million to buy data. And we formed the company in August of 2010, and were able to win one of those contracts 8 weeks later. And that was really how we sort of came out of the gate on Moon Express.
Flying out of the gate.
Yeah, we came, yes, full thrust.
Launching right out of the gate, yes.
Yep.
So I just want to make sure that we don't completely ignore our audience at this stage. So if we have any questions from the audience that might be forthcoming before I get into...
They're very bright, I can see.
It is, it's very tough to... So what's the current state of play? I know that you've got an office there at NASA Ames now. And earlier on last year was it that we had you over in summer at the SETI Institute?
Yes.
You were talking. You revealed some plans to have some landers that would have hoppers, I think.
Yes.
How's that all going? And
it's going great, Adrian. NASA has just been wonderful to us. After earning them as a customer, we were able to also become a partner with them, kind of the other side of the coin, through something called a Reimbursable Space Act agreement. And NASA, as a federal agency, has this very unique mechanism where the private sector can pay NASA in order to acquire expertise and advice and technology transfer. So we Moon Express have a residency at the NASA Research Park, surrounded by the wonderful NASA Ames, where we're able to interact and embrace a technical development that occurred in the last few years of something called the Common Spacecraft Bus, a very, very smart, small spacecraft that was given a flight opportunity by NASA headquarters to become a lunar orbiter. That's called the LADEE program, Lunar Atmosphere Dust Environment Explorer. How many people knew that the moon had an atmosphere? Yeah. Well, it has a little one. And as this technology is applied to become a lunar orbiter, I have, in a sense, partnered with NASA in order to make the investment necessary to make it into a lander system, which is a very difficult part of the whole process. So as we evolved the idea of this small lander that would land on the moon, and not just once, but many, many times. So the idea of we're not going to just throw away the airplane design and design another airplane. We're going to use this over and over again and get the economies of scale down so we can offer scientists and students and commercial players an opportunity to ride share and bring the cost of access to the moon down by an order of magnitude or more. So it's going very well. We are very proud of the partnership we have. We are doing well on the financial investment front. We're able to continue to demonstrate to our investors that we can meet the milestones, that high metrics of being applied to us, just like Silicon Valley standards. We have a great team. We have about 25 people now working at Moon Express. It's growing. We have riding this wave of awesome in this commercial era with SpaceX at the forefront, doing amazing things. That's helping the rest of us in our ability to believe in what we believe in others to believe in us. And I don't think I could have picked a better time, actually, if I could have picked when I wanted to be alive. This is kind of it. This is a great transition, and we're having a great time.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned SpaceX there, and I know that it's also a big decision to choose whose rockets you're going to fly on. How's the recent launch to the ISS boosted your confidence in?
No pun intended.
Right,
yes.
exactly.
So, well, I have great, I have 1,000% confidence in SpaceX and Elon to begin with, but 100,000 things can go wrong. Space is very, very hard. So I was just delighted, thrilled, excited. I watched the Dragon approaching ever so slow to the space. It was like watching a baseball game in slow motion, but I was on the edge of my seat, and it was fantastic because it really showed everyone that it could be done. So although MoonX is rocket agnostic, and any commercial rocket will do, any government rocket will do with a viable piggyback scenario, and any country's rocket will do, because we need to be international in scope. We do see SpaceX as a core facilitator of our lunar missions, and I'd be very, very happy to be perceived as a business line for SpaceX.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So there's recently been some pretty major announcements in the field of planetary resources, to use a company's name. How is the changing field for companies like Moon Express? How is that making things easier, harder? What's the dynamic that's happening at the moment, or is it too early to tell?
Well, no, it's not too early. The rising tide floats all spaceships. And for those of you who maybe hadn't seen the news, my good friend Peter Diamandis, together with another friend Eric Diamandis. No, they're not that close. Eric Anderson and another friend Chris Lewicki, who I worked with on the Phoenix mission, and others put together a company called Planetary Resources, which is a play to develop the asteroids for resources. So it couldn't be better. This is fantastic that this is happening. Our investors, and Naveen Jain in particular, and Barney Pell have announced their willingness to invest in offshore resources, off-Earth resources, a year and a half ago. So this is like, come into the pool. The water's great. This is fantastic that there's others that believe that this is right. The solar system is not only big enough for the two of us, it's big enough for 1 million others. Mm-hmm. And Moon Express, we just believe we have the right idea, and we believe that the billions of years of bombardment of the moon by asteroidal materials makes a natural reservoir of those resources to go get.
And it's only 3 days away.
And it's only 3 days away. But there's other arguments why, maybe the energy arguments of asteroids and free space might be an opportunistic one as well. So it's going to be an interesting future. But isn't it a fantastic story that we're having this conversation to begin with?
It is, absolutely. Yeah. I don't think even SETICon 1 we would have imagined this conversation. Yeah, we have a question.
Any idea when the launches might be?
Sure. So absolutely. So before the Google and X Prize expires at the end of 2015, for sure. With the Moon Express plan, we do see a 2014 timeframe. But ironically, we're not really in a race. We really need to get it right. So we won't be launching before we're ready. For those of us who have been on space missions, it's really hard. And we want to make sure that we have the success metrics properly in place and the risk tolerances properly identified before we launch the first mission.
FAA about launch licenses?
So you identify a long lead item, and the answer is yes. There are also long lead items in communications that is kind of a sleeper. How do you even get the signals down from the moon? So I think this is the watershed year for the Google Lunar X Prize in particular, 2012. Typically, rockets have about a 24-month lead time. So anybody who hasn't announced a rocket or being on a manifest by next year, it's going to be less credible to be able to achieve the end of 2015 as their launch date. We have one more.
Question over here.
When's the next anticipated launch of SpaceX, and what are the problems that have tied down the Virgin Atlantic or Virgin Galactic station?
We could look on the web and see the next scheduled launch
Okay.
of SpaceX, because they just published their manifest completely openly. So I don't know, but I believe it's the next 3 to 6 months, and I actually think it's a Canadian launch, for a Canadian launch. And Virgin Galactic, there's another, like, hats off to Richard for sticking it out. I mean, space is really hard, and we know that they had a setback, which involved loss of human lives several years ago. And this is going to be a hugely dramatic change in the way we humans look at spaceflight when Virgin Galactic and the others who are going to be offering space flights actually get those spaceships flying. And I think we're going to see that happen in the next 2 years.
What are the problems that they're encountering that
I don't. Well, I wouldn't say they're encountering any other problems other than you would anticipate encountering in trying to create a safe and reliable public transportation system to space. So they're identifying their problems. They're solving their problems. I'm not part of the company. I can only attest to, I know how hard it is. So I'm ready to wait, and for them to get it. I mean, they have hundreds and hundreds of people in their lineups waiting for the rise to space, and I hope I'm going to be one of them real soon.
Just a question on the communications that you bring up. Because you're using the Laddie bus or some similar variant, are you going to be able to capitalize on their communications?
Well, just to differentiate, it's almost accurate what you said, Adrian, but not quite. The common spacecraft bus is the common parent to both Laddie, and so it's a little it's subtle, but it's an important difference. So there is a large degree of overlap in the technology, but we can still do variants of what is useful to us commercially, whether it's communications or propulsion, and it's really up to us how much we utilize unchanged. So we're always in this tension of, well, don't change anything, but we should change some things.
Yep. Oh,
One last question, sorry. I don't know if you've heard of the Mars One group out of Sweden, I believe, but they're wanting to send a one-way manned mission to Mars by 2023 to build a successful colony that will be living there indefinitely. So there's no hope of return. Do you think that's reasonable, or do you think that's a long shot in the dark?
Well, it's a pretty bold thing to announce. I think there are people who will go one way to Mars. And 2023 sounds pretty aggressive. My bet would be on the people who have the rockets here on the West Coast and have the mission and the desire to do so. So my bet would be on Elon to be the first human mission ever to Mars. But I think, yes, there would be people that would go one way. Would I do it? Not at this stage, but there might be a stage in life that I would.
so on that note, ladies and gentlemen, I think we've come to the end of our allotted time, but if you'd like to talk to Bob after this, feel free to come up and ask him more detailed questions about how Moon Express is handling the challenges of getting to the moon. So please join me in thanking Bob for his great input here.
Good.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Bob.
Adrian.
Yes, I'm ready.
From launch to.
We're not, sorry, Adrian, we're not aligned
We're Lions on the lab.